The call that shattered my world came from a number I didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end changed everything I thought I knew about my own daughter. "Mrs. Quiros? This is Ricky Smith. I think we need to talk about Suzanne and some things she's been telling my family about you being dead. My name is Sandra Quiros, and I'm 52 years old. I've been working as a registered nurse at Phoenix General Hospital for almost 30 years, and I thought I had seen every kind of heartbreak that life could deliver through those emergency room doors. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for discovering that my own daughter had been living a lie so elaborate and cruel that it would ultimately destroy the most important relationship in her life. Let me tell you about Suzanne. She's 26 now, beautiful, intelligent, and works as a social media coordinator for a marketing firm in Boston. She's also the daughter I raised completely on my own after her father walked out, when she was just 3 years old. For 23 years, it was just Suzanne and me against the world, living in our small 2-bedroom apartment in Phoenix, making the best life we could on a nurse's salary. I worked double shifts, picked up overtime whenever I could, and saved every penny to make sure Suzanne had opportunities I never had. I paid for her college education, helped her move to Boston when she got her first real job, and supported her dreams even when it meant I was eating ramen noodles for dinner so she could have spending money for her new city life. I was so proud of the independent, successful woman she had become. Then 2 years ago, Suzanne met Ricky Smith at some networking event in Boston. Ricky comes from a completely different world than we do. His father, Jamie Smith, is a successful attorney who owns his own firm, and his mother, Dorothy Smith, is involved in philanthropy and sits on the boards of several charitable organizations. The Smith family has money, connections, and the kind of social status that Suzanne had always dreamed about but never experienced growing up. At first, I was thrilled that Suzanne had found someone who made her happy. When she called to tell me about Ricky, her voice was more excited than I had heard it in years. She described him as kind, successful, and from a good family. She sent me pictures of them together at fancy restaurants and charity events, and I could see how genuinely happy she looked. For the first time in her life, Suzanne was part of the world she had always admired from the outside. But as their relationship progressed, I started noticing changes in how Suzanne talked to me. Our weekly phone calls became shorter and less frequent. When I asked about meeting Ricky or visiting Boston, she always had excuses about why the timing wasn't right. She stopped mentioning me in her social media posts, and when I commented on her pictures, she wouldn't respond. I told myself she was just busy with work and her new relationship, that this was normal for a young woman building her own life. What I didn't realize was that Suzanne had become embarrassed by her background, by me, by the humble life we had built together. She had tasted a different kind of existence with the Smith family, and everything about her real life started to feel like something she needed to hide or escape from. My best friend Carmen, who's also a nurse and has known Suzanne since she was a little girl, tried to warn me that something was wrong. "Sandra, that girl is pulling away from you in a way that isn't healthy," she told me during one of our coffee breaks at the hospital. "I've seen her type before, kids who get a taste of money, and suddenly their own family isn't good enough anymore." But I defended Suzanne. I made excuses for her distance and convinced myself that she was just growing up, becoming independent. I told Carmen that she was being too suspicious, that Suzanne loved me and would never deliberately hurt me. I believed that no matter what changes were happening in Suzanne's life, the bond between us was unbreakable. I was about to discover just how wrong I could be about someone I thought I knew better than anyone else in the world. To understand how devastating this betrayal became, you need to know what Suzanne's childhood was really like, because the truth is so different from the story she eventually told the Smith family that it still takes my breath away. When Suzanne's father left us, I was 26 years old with a 3-year-old daughter and a nursing degree I had just finished. I was terrified, heartbroken, and completely overwhelmed, but I was also determined that Suzanne would never feel like she was missing out on anything because of our circumstances. I worked the night shift at the hospital so I could be available during the day for school events, soccer games, and homework help. When other kids went on expensive vacations, I planned camping trips and day adventures that cost almost nothing, but created memories that I thought Suzanne treasured. I taught Suzanne to be proud of hard work and to value character over material possessions. We shopped at thrift stores and made it into a treasure hunt. We cooked dinner together every night and talked about our days. I helped her with every school project, attended every parent-teacher conference, and cheered at every soccer game. When she needed a dress for prom, I worked extra shifts for 3 months to afford something beautiful. When she wanted to learn piano, I found a teacher who would trade lessons for me cleaning their house. Suzanne was an excellent student, popular with her classmates, and seemed genuinely happy throughout high school. She talked about wanting to move to a big city someday and work in marketing or communications, and I supported those dreams completely. When she got accepted to Boston University with partial scholarships, I was beyond proud. I took out loans to cover what the scholarships didn't, and I worked extra shifts to send her spending money every month. During her college years, Suzanne would call me regularly with stories about her classes, her friends, and her internships. She seemed grateful for my support and would often say things like, "Mom, I know how hard you're working for me, and I promise I'm going to make it worth it someday." When she graduated and got her first job in Boston, I flew out for the ceremony. It was the first time I had taken vacation days in over 2 years, but seeing her walk across that stage was worth every sacrifice I had made. For the first year after graduation, our relationship seemed normal. Suzanne was adjusting to working life and living in an expensive city, but she called me regularly and visited Phoenix twice. She seemed to appreciate everything I had done for her and would often reminisce about our adventures when she was growing up. She'd laugh about our camping trips and the way we used to make elaborate plans for free activities around Phoenix. Then she met Ricky, and everything started to change in ways I didn't understand at the time. The first red flag was when she stopped mentioning me in conversations about her life. When I asked about her work friends or her social activities, she would give vague answers and change the subject quickly. She stopped posting pictures of herself visiting Phoenix, and when I tagged her in throwback photos of us together, she wouldn't respond or would ask me to remove them. The second red flag was how she started talking about money and status in ways that were completely foreign to how I had raised her. She would make comments about how expensive everything was in Boston, how hard it was to fit in with people who had grown up with more advantages, and how she felt like she needed to upgrade her wardrobe and lifestyle to be taken seriously at work. I offered to help however I could, even though my own finances were still tight from her college loans. The third and most troubling red flag was how she started describing her childhood when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I overheard her on a video call once, telling someone that she had grown up pretty sheltered and hadn't been exposed to cultural opportunities as a child. She described our apartment as very modest and mentioned that she was still learning about fine dining and social etiquette because those weren't things she had experienced growing up. None of these comments were technically lies, but the tone suggested that she viewed her upbringing as something lacking or embarrassing rather than the loving, stable home I had worked so hard to provide. I started to realize that Suzanne was beginning to rewrite our history to fit into a narrative that made more sense with her new life in Boston. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday evening in March. I was just finishing a 12-hour shift at the hospital when my phone rang, and Suzanne's name appeared on the screen. I answered eagerly because we hadn't spoken in almost 3 weeks, which was the longest gap we'd ever had in our communication. "Mom, I have some exciting news," Suzanne said, but her voice sounded strangely formal and distant. "Ricky proposed last weekend. We're engaged." I should have felt pure joy in that moment, but something about her tone made me hesitate. "Suzanne, that's wonderful. Congratulations, honey. Tell me everything. How did he propose? When is the wedding? I can't wait to start planning." There was a long pause before Suzanne responded, "Well, about that. Mom, I need you to understand that this is going to be a very different kind of wedding than what you might be expecting. Ricky's family has certain expectations and traditions, and we're planning something that fits with their social circle. Of course, I said, though I was starting to feel uneasy. I'm sure we can figure out how to make everything work. When do I get to meet his parents? And when do you want to start looking at dresses together? Another pause. Mom, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This isn't going to be the kind of wedding where families get heavily involved in the planning. Dorothy, that's Ricky's mother, she has very specific ideas about how things should be done, and she's already connected us with wedding planners and vendors who work with their social circle. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. Suzanne, what are you saying? Are you telling me I'm not invited to help plan your wedding? I'm saying that the planning is being handled by people who understand this particular world, Suzanne replied, and her voice was getting colder with each word. Mom, you have to understand that this isn't a backyard barbecue or a church basement reception. This is going to be at the country club, with over 200 guests, many of whom are important business connections for Ricky's father's law firm. Honey, I may not know about country clubs, but I know about love and family and celebrating important moments, I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. I've been dreaming about your wedding day since you were a little girl. I want to be part of this. That's exactly the problem, Suzanne snapped, and suddenly the mask of politeness fell away completely. You still see me as that little girl, and you still think that your way of doing things is going to work in my life now. Mom, I need you to accept that this wedding is going to reflect who I am now, not who I used to be. Who you used to be, I repeated, feeling my heart breaking. Suzanne, you're still the same person. You're still my daughter. Nothing about getting married changes the fact that we're family, but it does change things, she insisted. Mom, I love you, but you have to understand that I can't have you trying to take over my wedding with your ideas about how things should be done. Dorothy has already made arrangements for everything, and it's going to be beautiful and appropriate for the kind of people who will be attending. I took a deep breath and tried a different approach. Okay, I hear what you're saying about the planning, but surely I can still be involved in some way. Maybe we could go dress shopping together, or you could help me pick out what to wear. I just want to be part of your special day, sweetheart. The silence that followed was so long that I thought the call had dropped. When Suzanne finally spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Mom, I don't think you understand how different this world is from what you're used to. Everyone at this wedding is going to be educated, sophisticated, successful. They're going to be wearing designer clothes and talking about things like art collections and European vacations and business investments. And you think I can't handle being around educated, successful people? I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I think you're going to feel out of place, and I think that's going to make everyone uncomfortable, Suzanne said bluntly, including me. That's when I realized that my daughter wasn't just excluding me from the wedding planning. She was ashamed of me, and she was about to exclude me from the most important day of her life because she thought I wasn't good enough for her new family. The weeks following that devastating phone call were some of the darkest of my life. I kept waiting for Suzanne to call back and apologize, to tell me she had been stressed and hadn't meant what she said. But instead, I got a formal wedding invitation in the mail addressed to Sandra Quiros with no guest option and no indication that I would have any special role in the ceremony as the mother of the bride. Carmen found me crying in the break room at the hospital when the invitation arrived. Sandra, this is not normal, she said firmly, as I showed her the stiff, formal card with its embossed lettering. I've seen plenty of family drama in my time, but a daughter completely excluding her mother from her wedding? Something else is going on here. I tried calling Suzanne several times to discuss the invitation and my role in the wedding, but my calls went straight to voicemail. When she finally called me back 3 days later, her message was brief and cold. Mom, I got your messages. The invitation is correct. The wedding is going to be small and intimate, just immediate family and close friends. I'll call you after the honeymoon to catch up. Immediate family? I repeated to Carmen afterward. I am her immediate family. I'm the only family she has. That's when Carmen suggested something that seemed extreme at the time but turned out to be the most important advice anyone had ever given me. Sandra, I think you need to find out what Suzanne has been telling these people about you. Something doesn't add up. Why would a young woman completely cut her mother out of her wedding unless she's told them something that makes it impossible for you to be there? I decided to do something I had never done before. I researched the Smith family online. What I found made Suzanne's behavior even more confusing. Jamie Smith's law firm had a website with family photos showing him, Dorothy, and Ricky at various charity events and social gatherings. Dorothy Smith's social media profiles were full of posts about family values, the importance of strong relationships, and supporting young people. These didn't seem like people who would encourage a bride to exclude her mother from her wedding. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. In a social media post from 6 months earlier, Dorothy had shared a photo from a charity luncheon with a caption that read, "Today we honored families who have overcome tragedy and loss. My heart goes out to young people like my son's girlfriend, who lost her mother at a young age but has built such a successful life despite that early trauma." I read that post 5 times before it really sank in. Suzanne had told the Smith family that I was dead. I immediately called Suzanne, but again my call went to voicemail. This time, I left a message that was very different from my previous ones. "Suzanne, I need you to call me back immediately." I found Dorothy's social media post about young people who have lost their mothers. "We need to talk about this right now." She didn't call back. But 2 days later, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was male, polite, and concerned. "Mrs. Quiros? This is Ricky Smith, Suzanne's fiancé. I think we need to talk." "Ricky," I said, my heart pounding. "I'm very glad you called. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding about my status." "Mrs. Quiros, I'm calling because my mother has been asking questions about Suzanne's family background for the wedding planning, and some things aren't adding up. Suzanne has told us that her mother died when she was young, but when I tried to find information about funeral arrangements or memorial services for the program, I couldn't find any records. And then yesterday, when I was going through some of Suzanne's mail that was delivered to my apartment by mistake, I found a Mother's Day card from someone named Sandra. "Ricky," I said carefully, "I think you and I need to have a conversation in person. How soon can you get to Phoenix?" "I can fly out tomorrow," he said immediately. "Mrs. Quiros, can you tell me? Are you Suzanne's mother?" "Yes, Ricky. I am very much alive, and I have been completely excluded from my daughter's wedding based on lies she's apparently told your family about me." The silence on the other end of the phone lasted for almost a full minute before Ricky spoke. And again, "Mrs. Quiros, I think you and my parents need to hear each other's stories. Something is very, very wrong here." Ricky flew to Phoenix the next day, and what happened during our 3-hour conversation changed everything. I had prepared photo albums, school records, medical documents, and years of text messages between Suzanne and me, ready to prove that I was not only alive but had been a devoted mother for 26 years. What I wasn't prepared for was learning the elaborate web of lies that Suzanne had constructed about her entire life. "Mrs. Quiros," Ricky said as we sat in my living room, "I need to tell you what Suzanne told my family about her background, because I think you deserve to know how extensive this deception has been." According to Ricky, Suzanne had told the Smith family that her mother had died in a car accident when she was 16. She claimed to have been raised by a wealthy aunt who had since passed away, leaving her a modest inheritance that had paid for her college education. She had described growing up in Scottsdale rather than Phoenix, in a large house with a pool, attending private schools and taking expensive family vacations. She told us she was an only child who had inherited her mother's jewelry collection and family heirlooms. Ricky continued, his voice filled with disbelief. She showed my mother what she claimed was her mother's engagement ring and said it had been in her family for generations. I recognized the ring he was describing. It was a cubic zirconia piece that Suzanne had bought herself from a department store during college, something she had shown me proudly when she got her first paycheck from an internship, but the lies went even deeper. Suzanne had told the Smith family that she had graduated from an expensive private university rather than the state school she had actually attended on scholarships. She claimed to have spent a semester studying abroad in Paris, a trip that had never happened. She had even created fake stories about family traditions and cultural background that bore no resemblance to our real life. The most painful part, Ricky said, is that she told us she felt like an orphan who had never experienced real family love, and that marrying into our family was giving her the first taste of what it felt like to belong somewhere. When I heard that, I broke down completely. For 26 years, I had poured every ounce of love, energy, and resources I had into making sure Suzanne felt cherished and secure. I had sacrificed my own social life, career advancement, and financial stability to ensure that she never felt like she was missing anything important. To learn that she had described herself as unloved and orphaned was more devastating than any of the other lies. Ricky was as shocked as I was. Mrs. Quiros, my parents specifically chose to include Suzanne in our family because they felt sorry for her tragic background. My mother has been planning memorial tributes for your memory as part of the wedding ceremony. She's been treating Suzanne like a grieving daughter who needed extra love and support. That's when I realized the full scope of what Suzanne had done. She hadn't just lied to gain sympathy. She had manipulated the Smith family's genuine kindness and used their compassion to create a false identity for herself. Ricky, I said finally, what are you going to do with this information? I'm going to fly back to Boston tonight and confront Suzanne with everything I've learned, he said firmly. But first, I want to invite you to come with me. My parents need to meet you in person, and Suzanne needs to face the consequences of what she's done. The confrontation happened 3 days later in the Smith family's living room in Boston. Dorothy and Jaime were gracious and welcoming to me, though clearly shaken by the extent of Suzanne's deception. When Suzanne arrived for what she thought was a casual dinner, she found me sitting on the couch next to Dorothy. The look on her face when she saw me was something I will never forget. It wasn't guilt or shame, it was pure panic and rage that her carefully constructed world was collapsing. "How dare you come here?" she said to me, ignoring everyone else in the room. "You had no right to interfere in my relationship." "Suzanne," Ricky said quietly, "your mother didn't interfere in anything. I called her because I needed to understand why nothing you've told us about your family adds up to reality." What followed was 2 hours of Suzanne trying to explain, justify, and minimize her lies while the Smith family and I listened in stunned silence. She claimed she had been protecting everyone from complicated family dynamics, that she had simplified her background to avoid boring people with details, and that her lies were motivated by love rather than selfishness. But when Ricky asked her directly whether she understood how her lies had hurt both families, Suzanne looked him in the eye and said, "I did what I had to do to build the life I wanted." That's when Ricky stood up and quietly said, "Then you'll have to build it without me." The aftermath of that confrontation was swift and devastating for Suzanne, but ultimately healing for everyone else involved. Ricky called off the wedding immediately, and the Smith family insisted on personally contacting their guests to explain that the ceremony was canceled due to irreconcilable differences regarding family values and honesty. Dorothy later told me that she felt personally betrayed by Suzanne's deception, not just because of the lies themselves, but because of how Suzanne had manipulated their family's genuine desire to support someone they believed was grieving and alone. "We opened our hearts to her because we thought she needed healing," Dorothy said. "Instead, she used our compassion to create a fantasy that denied your very existence." Suzanne's reaction to losing Ricky was exactly what I had come to expect from her by that point. She blamed everyone except herself. She accused me of sabotaging her relationship out of jealousy, claimed that Ricky's family was classist and judgmental, and insisted that she had only lied because society forced her to be ashamed of her poor background. She sent me a series of angry text messages, calling me vindictive and selfish for destroying her chance at happiness. but what struck me most about her response was that she never once acknowledged the pain her lies had caused me. She never apologized for telling people I was dead, for denying my existence, or for trying to erase 26 years of love and sacrifice. Even in her anger and desperation, she remained focused entirely on her own losses rather than the damage she had inflicted on others. The Smith family, on the other hand, showed me a level of kindness and respect that I had not experienced in years. They invited me to stay with them for several days while we all processed what had happened, and they treated me with the honor and appreciation that should have come from my own daughter. Dorothy and I spent hours talking about parenting, sacrifice, and the pain of watching children make choices that destroy the very relationships that have sustained them. "Sandra," Dorothy said to me on my last evening in Boston, "I want you to know that meeting you has been one of the most eye-opening experiences of my life. The way you raised Suzanne, as a single mother working multiple jobs while putting her through college, is more impressive than anything our family has ever accomplished with all our advantages. Jamie offered to help me legally if Suzanne tried to cause me any problems, and Ricky asked if he could stay in touch because he genuinely wanted to maintain a relationship with me despite everything that had happened. You're the person I thought I was getting to know through Suzanne's stories," he told me. "The difference is that you're real, and your love for her was real, even if she couldn't appreciate it." As for my relationship with Suzanne, it took almost 6 months before we spoke again. She eventually called me after losing her job. Apparently, word of the wedding scandal had spread through her professional network in ways that damaged her reputation. She was facing financial difficulties and needed help, which forced her to acknowledge my existence again. Our conversation was painful but necessary. I told her that I would always love her because she was my daughter, but that I could never trust her again unless she was willing to take full responsibility for her choices and their consequences. I explained that her lies hadn't just hurt me, they had revealed something about her character that frightened me. "Suzanne," I said, "you didn't just lie about facts. You denied my existence, erased our history, and used other people's kindness to build a false life. Those aren't mistakes, they're deliberate choices that show me you're capable of cruelty I never imagined," she cried during that conversation. But I wasn't sure if her tears were about genuine remorse or about the consequences she was facing. Time will tell whether she's capable of the kind of change that would make a real relationship possible between us. What I learned from this experience is that you can sacrifice everything for someone and still not be enough for them if they're determined to become someone else entirely. I also learned that real family isn't about blood or obligation, it's about people who value you, respect your contributions, and treat your love as the precious gift it is. The Smith family has become dear friends, and Dorothy and I now have lunch whenever I visit Boston. They've shown me what it looks like when people appreciate sacrifice rather than taking it for granted. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals lead to the most important discoveries about your own worth and the kind of people who deserve a place in your life.